Greetings to everyone. In this video, let's look at one of the questions that people often entertain or harbor within themselves. Some care to raise it, some don't, but the question is real and therefore it's relevant and desirable to seek a clearer understanding of what that particular spiritual issue or theme or question implies. What is the question? In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus teaches that we should not resist evil. Do not resist evil. Instead, what should we do? We are advised or exhorted by Jesus to overcome evil and to make good prevail where evil threatens to rule and ruin life. So it's very clear. This teaching of Jesus runs quite contrary to our assumptions, our commonsensical notions, even our ethical sense. Till the time of Jesus, and in fact, even today, most people assume that our duty is to resist evil. That is in theory. Most people do not resist evil. They simply look the other way. They pretend that it doesn't exist. And they wake up only when the sting of evil gets them. And then they complain and cry and make a scene. So neither living in denial of the reality of evil, nor venturing into a head-on collision with evil is spiritually valid. So this is the sum and substance of what Jesus says here, though of course it needs to be understood. The question is why? Why shouldn't we resist evil? Now surely when Jesus teaches like this, he has a certain understanding of good and evil. And more importantly, he has an understanding of what resistance means. What does it mean to resist? Now, what I'm going to say will certainly surprise you. If it doesn't shock you, very likely this will shock you, but this is the truth. Good and evil belong together. That is to say, not in absolute terms, but in terms of how we understand good and evil, there is a problem. Our understanding of good and evil needs to be seriously re-examined, needs to be questioned. We think that good is the opposite of evil. One of the important spiritual truths is that opposites belong together. Now, it's obvious, for example, that day implies day and night. So light and darkness belong together within the framework of a day. A day is incomplete without the night. Night is the absence of light. We associate day with light. So within the ambit, within the mold of a day, light and darkness exist or belong together. So in that sense, light is not the opposite of darkness, nor is darkness the opposite of light. They belong together in the reality called day. Similarly, high and low. In schools, you would have learned that the opposite of high is low. So you have gotten to this idea that high means exactly the opposite. Absolutely nothing in common between high and low. Whereas the fact is that high and low belong together within the idea of space or altitude. Now, far and near. What is the opposite of near? Far. So we think that far is a negation of near and near is a negation of far. But near and far belong together in the idea of space. Now, if something is far to you at this time, you walk towards it, you are nearing that which is afar, and as you near it, that which was far becomes near. So it is only a function of space. Rich and poor. What is the opposite of rich? Poor. But rich and poor belong together in the idea of wealth. If there is no wealth, who is real, who is rich, who is poor? So our idea of opposites is not valid. It may be valid in grammar, but it's not valid in experience, it's not valid in philosophy, it is certainly not valid in spirituality. So very often, when people try to take sword against the so-called evil, they don't realize that what they recognize as evil is themselves. This is very clear in the teaching of Jesus found in the beginning of the 7th chapter of Matthew's Gospel, where Jesus says, "Why do you judge and condemn others? Why are you so keen to pick a fight with others? You're an expert in discerning the speck, the mote in the eyes of others, whereas there is a beam in your own eye." That is to say, if I consider you as my enemy, and if I'm only interested in finding fault with you for the sake of finding fault with you, it is not because I'm different from you, but because I'm exactly like you. This is not to say that I should not disagree with you, even if you're doing what is obnoxious and unjustifiable, indefensible. I should always keep quiet, or I should say, yes, 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 that's the right thing to do. That's not the idea. The idea is that what we often consider to be the exact opposite of what we are or who we are may very well be a carbon copy of ourselves. Now, this is something that we have to keep in mind all the time. So therefore, when we try to resist evil, two things happen. One is we reinforce evil by the way we resist evil using our resources, which are also evil. After all, we resist something only in terms of who we are. We are nothing but a different version of that particular evil we are trying to fight. So therefore, the end result of that fight against evil is that that evil gets reinforced and strengthened by the very attack that we launch against it. The second outcome is that we get penetrated by that evil which we think we are attacking. Because after all, when we attack that evil, that very evil which was sleeping within us wakes up. So unknowingly, or by virtue of the pressures of circumstances, we adopt the strategies and methods dictated by the logic of that evil. It is a commonsensical principle that something can be fought only according to its nature. I remember an entomologist, as someone who was specializing in the study of mosquitoes, who said that if you want to catch a mosquito, you must think like a mosquito. So, without knowing it, we come down to the level of the evil we fight, and therefore ultimately we end up completely colonized by the evil that we fight. So this is not the way to approach it. At the same time, we cannot deny the reality of evil, nor can we happily coexist with evil, or try to justify and wish it away in some form or the other, as the priest did in the parable of the Good Samaritan, turned his face away, and he turned his face away and went. So we can't turn our face away from the reality of evil and pretend that all is well with the world. Evil is a reality. So what is to be done? Overcome evil with good. So the source of that good, you remember the conversation between Jesus and the rich young man? The young man begins his address to Jesus by saying, I know you are good. Jesus stops him in his track and says, no, God alone is good. Therefore, if we are to overcome evil with good, we can do so only to the extent that we are rooted in God. For that, of course, the most fundamental requirement is that we should believe in God. When we launch into an ethical adventure of fighting evil on our own strength, our own wisdom, we end up completely overwhelmed by the very evil we fight. On the other hand, Jesus says, and that is absolutely wonderful, this is the quintessential distilled wisdom that will stand the test of time for all ages to come. We can overcome evil with the help of what is good. Overcome actually literally means coming from above. Do not engage, if this is evil, do not engage evil head on like this. Come from above. That above is good. God alone is good. And therefore, our struggle against evil, if it is to produce spiritually valid outcomes that would enrich our life and the life of others, then we have to approach that particular spiritual mission differently from how we otherwise would do it. We have to relate to it, respond to it, steadfastly rooted in God, or being steadfastly rooted in God, so that we do not fight evil with evil, but we overcome evil with good. God is the fountainhead of what is good, eternally and steadfastly good, good that will not turn into evil. And therefore, the possibility of overcome evil exists, and overcoming evil is a spiritual duty. And this is the spiritual discipline that his followers are to maintain. A related teaching may now be mentioned, and that is the idea of loving one's enemy. You find that in the 5th chapter of Matthew's Gospel, I think it's verse 44. Love your enemy. Now, in the light of what I've already said, this teaching becomes clearer. The persons you consider to be your enemy or enemies are very much like yourself in all respects. And it's an aberration in your own mind that now there is this relationship of enmity. I remember reading a book by Soren Kierkegaard, the Dutch philosopher, who said that the precondition for enmity is friendship or a relationship of love. And then he goes on to say this in a very crisp manner. He says that hate is ruined love. It's very easy to remember this. It's beautiful. Now, Kierkegaard has this way of putting things in a very crisp and beautiful, unforgettable way. What is hate? It is ruined love. So unless and until a relationship of love pre-exists, it's impossible to enter into the domain of enmity. So therefore, the reality is that love, not its ruined state of enmity. Therefore, hold on to that love. Why? Because to understand that, we have to go to St. Paul's first letter to Corinthians, chapter 3, verse 8, where he says, love never fails. And again, Kierkegaard has a very beautiful explanation of this particular teaching in a book called The Works of Love, where he says the reason why love never fails is that it is godly love. He says love of every other kind will fail. The love as it is understood by the world, love as it is understood by poets, secular love, romantic love, physical love, puppy love, whatever, all these will fail. But that love will not fail, and I'm quoting his words, which is rooted in God because God is eternal. That which changes is not eternal. That's why the writer of Hebrews says Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. God is eternal. God is unfailing. God doesn't change. God endures. And therefore, love which is rooted in God cannot fail. And the idea of loving one's enemy becomes feasible. Most people think it's utterly impossible. And I myself, I have to be honest with you, often despair in the face of this enormous spiritual demand, which is impossible to attain simply by human goodwill or good intentions. Unless and until we are empowered by God, unless we are spiritually empowered, we cannot even think of undertaking the spiritual task of loving our enemies. But Jesus says it should be possible because love never fails. Again, let me repeat the insight of Kierkegaard. Hate is ruined love. Love cannot be ruined if it is rooted in God. Love never fails. Love endures. And therefore, even if this love has failed in the other party, because that person, that individual is not rooted in God, you cannot abdicate the duty to love just because love has turned into its opposite. Love has become ruined into hate in the other person. You cannot abdicate the spiritual responsibility to continue to love that person and therefore love your enemy. Now, how profound this principle is has to be understood in practical terms. If this one principle can be practiced globally, there will be absolute peace in the world. If you want to establish enduring and blemishless peace in the world, just one teaching is enough. Love your enemies. Which is, of course, part of an extension of the teaching, love your neighbor as yourself. Because all your enemies are also your neighbors. I have no enmity with Barack Obama or Biden or Putin because we are not neighbors. They don't know me. I know them, but they don't know me. Therefore, absolutely no scope of enmity. I'm perfectly safe from Putin because he does not know me. But if I were his neighbor, he would have put a bomb on me if I did not do his will. So, loving one's neighbor, loving one's enemy, and then the teaching, do not resist evil, overcome evil with good. The ultimate good is love. So the only resource for overcoming evil, in the light of what we have seen so far, is godly love. And that is the good with which evil can be overcome, which is the model that Jesus exemplified through his public ministry. And the cross of Jesus Christ is the ultimate validation of that strategy. Obviously, this doesn't come naturally to us. And if you really think of it rationally, you only despair because rationality does not allow us to factor the empowerment of spiritual forces or the empowerment of God in the process. God's love cannot be reduced to human rationality. This is not to say that rationality is irrelevant. Rationality is extremely important, and I have stated it so many ways in my writings and the videos that I've already shared with you. I don't want to belittle rationality, but it's only one of the faculties, and human rationality as compared to the rationality of God is extremely limited. And to try and comprehend or squeeze all of God's reality into the narrow framework of my individual rationality is an attempt that's doomed to fail right from the beginning or before it can get started. Therefore, we have to have an empowerment beyond our own individual rationality, and we need to be transplanted into the rationality of God. That's the idea of our abiding in Jesus and Jesus abiding in us. So it's a paradigm shift. So all these are the necessary stages of our spiritual empowerment. Once we reach that stage, that which now seems impossible, like the moving of the mountains. You remember Jesus said, if you have faith as large as a mustard seed, you can ask the mountains to move and they move. These are the mountains. That is, the possibilities that we consider to be absolutely impossible. The impossible becomes possible. That's the idea. That's a function of faith. That faith itself is rooted in love. God is love. And the love that is at work in us is a reflection of God's love. So it is within this entire gamut of ideas that specific teachings of Jesus Christ can be understood. Otherwise, they remain in a disjointed fashion. Nothing makes any sense. The teachings of Jesus Christ will remain a collection of words, and they have no relationship to us. And therefore, we are nominal Christians, but Christians who do not experience the truth of God's love, God's engagement with the world, engagement with our own predicament, our own personality. And we just sail along merrily with everybody else, like the 5 foolish maidens who took the lamp but did not have oil in their lamp. That's a perfect symbol of nominal Christianity. And the teachings of Jesus Christ are, from start to finish, a loving invitation to go beyond the limits of nominal Christianity to the excitement and the rich experiences of a living faith, which is lived day to day in a state of obedience to God. So that's more or less my thinking on this particular topic, and I hope it makes some sense. I'm aware of the limitations of what I've shared with you, but again, I don't despair of them, because I know that those of you who are part of, all of you who are part of this fellowship of minds called the Temple of Thought, are different from others who only want to be passively entertained. You're also willing to actively seek for yourself, deepen your understanding, and attain greater clarity about the very rudimentary ideas that I introduce from time to time. I want to thank you for your partnership in this mission in that sense. Have a wonderful day ahead.